The U.S. women's national team failed at the World Cup. And this is my take on what happened and what is going to happen even in a better way moving forward. And here's the deal, right? We can't say anything other than the U.S. women's national team failed. They've never finished less than third place at a World Cup. And I'm a big supporter of the U.S. women's national team. But I've been calling it for the last almost 10 years, the last two World Cups prior to this one, of a collapse that's incoming. And I said, you can see it because, I was very impressed 8 years ago by the Japanese women and how well they played. And they just didn't have the physicality yet that the U.S. women's national team has. And we've always been a country, even on the men's side, by the way, that has relied on athletes, the power, the athleticism. You can see it in our youth. So I think it's a collection of all that put together, and it's represented on the senior national team. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, but the problem does become this in the long run, okay? So here's what I'm going to talk about in terms of why I think we're going to struggle from the women's perspective, and then obviously this will translate back to the men's perspective. And it's quite simple, right? The U.S. women's national team was the leader for years of women's soccer. Why? It's a great question. Why? And my opinion is because the other countries never even really played. They didn't invest in it. They didn't really play at it. And if they did play, they just put women together to play in a tournament every once in a while. That's what it looked like. Now what you're seeing over the last 4 to 8 years, and especially at this World Cup, countries are now investing and putting processes in place that they can actually just take from the men's side and translate it to women's development. So here's the key, before I give you the real nugget with this. I've talked about this many times. I have a very, very good family friend. He's like a dad to me, who is a technical director at one of the biggest clubs in France. By the way, they have professional women's. What's interesting though is he works directly in the academy. With the academy, they have the women's program, so the girls program trains at the academy with the same fields as the boys. They have 3 or 4 specific fields just for girls soccer, for football. That's what we call it, right? What does that tell you? They're now taking women's football seriously. They're putting money, they're using their resources, and they're putting them on the same developmental path as boys or men. And it's once that happens across the board with all countries, like any major European or South American nation, the game's over. Because I've talked about this before. I mean, one, the entire organization is screwed. U.S. soccer in general, the youth soccer system, or just soccer in general in the United States is screwed, one. But two, the youth development structure is literally non-existent. And I hope after being knocked out of the World Cup, all of us can take a step back and say, hey, something's not right here. And if we don't fix it, I'm telling you now, we will not be successful again in a World Cup on the women's or the men's side. And here's the deal, right? We've never have we been a producer or exporter of top talent from the men's side. We haven't. And this is my personal opinion. You may not agree. I don't believe that we have one world-class player on the men's side. I think Christian Pulisic is a great player, but there's a difference between a great player and a world-class player. And I'll reference Sir Alex Ferguson with this. He talked about in one of his books, he's only had 4 world-class players. And if he's saying he's only had 4 world-class players, and 3 of them were Ryan Giggs, Paul Scholes, no, I remember all 4, sorry. Ryan Giggs, Paul Scholes, Eric Cantona, and Ronaldo. What does that tell you about what we have? If those are the 4 world-class players, and he had a lot of damn good players, but he's saying he only had 4 world-class, then you can't even put any of our national team players even close to that scale. They're probably good players, not great players, if he's saying that only 4 world-class. So it's the point being is we don't have a developmental system, and we don't export world-class players on the men's side. So now let's translate that to the women. We've dominated women, like I said, because we've invested. We've had time, energy, money put into women's soccer. We don't have the youth landscape. We don't, in my opinion, have the pro landscape yet. And all the other clubs around the world, so again, using France or England or Germany or Spain, they already have the infrastructure. They already have the development systems. So if they actually start investing for real and bringing women through the system, the game's over. We're screwed. Like screwed. Like screwed. And, you know, I listened to two of our former national team players, one on the women's side, one on the men's side, and they're like, oh, it's good for the game. Of course it's good for the game, one. But two, like, oh, you know, the women will be okay. And I'm like, you guys don't see what happens on a day-to-day of youth development, one, and two, that we don't have the structure in place. There is, like, the women's professional game is nowhere near the same here, in my opinion, than it is in Europe now. Like, they have the UEFA Women's Champions League. We don't have a UEFA Women's Champions League here. I mean, that's an obvious answer, right? But the premise is the same. If we don't have a Women's Champions League or a competition of that caliber, where do you think our best women are going to want to go? Europe, obviously. And what's interesting is I'm already predicting the same thing's going to happen because our youth development structure is not good enough. Our women in, say, 10 years, 10 to 12, 15 years at most, they're not going to have the level to actually get to Europe. They're not going to be good enough to play at the highest level. And like, I'll give you one last example. I can't use the names, but I'll just explain to you. I wish I was making this up, but it's true. Again, using my same friend with one of the biggest clubs in France. When they first started their women's team, they signed one of the best U.S. women's national team players. And forward, you can probably figure out who it is. And you can do your own research and figure it out. Point being, though, they were super excited about her coming. Like a week after, maybe less, maybe 3 days, 4 days after, my buddy calls me and he goes, bro, we're so shocked. And I'm like, what you mean? And he's like, she don't have the level. And I'm like, I know that. And he's like, she's not going to sign. We're not going to sign her. And I'm like, I wouldn't either. And it's just funny because it's like, this is one of our best players ever in terms of results and whatnot. And she started at the last World Cup that we just got knocked out on as the number 9, and she's not good enough. And they're going, yeah, she's not good enough. And that's because they're looking at it from a complete technical standpoint. She is not good enough. That is okay. But like, again, now that they're investing into football for real for the women's side, that's only going to signify way bigger problems in the long run for us, because if they don't have the level and the other countries are spending the money, the resources, the time, the energy, and they already have the infrastructure. All of these clubs have professional academies, and they already have the boys' side. So imagine if they all start doing the women's side and they use the same infrastructure and resources. They're going to go like this, and then you're going to see us go like this. We are regressing, completely regressing. Contrary to what people want to say, we're regressing. And if they don't want to openly admit it, that's okay. But that's what's happening, and it's not going to change anytime soon because it's just a flaw in the system. And I hope because of the loss, it sent alarm bells out saying we can't get away with this anymore, because we got away with it with the last 2 World Cups, in my opinion. We relied on athleticism. We relied on having the infrastructure already in place. We didn't really have a challenge. Like, we didn't have a challenge that we could go to the 3rd place match minimum every single year. And now the alarm bells should be ringing, like slamming, for U.S. soccer, because they should be going, okay, we're screwed if we don't fix this ASAP. I don't think that's going to happen personally. Maybe I'm wrong. Time's going to tell. I mean, it's August 8th, so we're going to see what actually happens, but it's going to be a problem. And if those alarm bells don't start ringing, the long-term play for U.S. soccer and on the men's and women's side, it's over. Like, there's just going to be no development platform. The players will not be good enough to go to Europe, and we're going to see continued regression. See you in the next video.